because how many times at the last minute have one of us talked to the other one and said, "Hey, man, you want to do a live stream?" And normally both of us are, either one of us are like, "Sure, why not?" So now Jesse's my last minute man because the guest that I was supposed to have on could not make it again. So Roz was supposed to be on with me this week. He was busy. So now Jesse has agreed to come back on with me. He's got apparently he has a joke plus plus a trivia question, which we always try to remember to do, and we both of us have forgotten. And I think the last two times in a row, tonight and the last time he was on, we remembered trivia, or he remembered trivia questions. So anyway, Jesse, take it away, sir.
All right, thanks for having me again. We are also live on YouTube on the Constitutional Grassroots Movement YouTube page. I would also be streaming to Facebook like you are, but I'm currently on a 20-day suspension. Well, 30-day, but 20 days left. So I'd like to start off with the trivia question, as always now. So the question today, which will be answered at the end of the podcast, is what glaring spelling error was made right above where our founding fathers signed the Constitution? And I will answer that at the end of the podcast today. And
Interesting.
so here's the joke for today. I gave last night I did overnight watch at a gas station that is being constructed, and right at the end of my overnight watch, a man showed up, and this part of the joke is true, by the way. This man shows up, his car broke down just down the highway, and his phone was dead. So once workers started showing up at the construction site, I agreed I'll take him up to the gas station, buy him a charger so that he could get the charger, his phone charged, see if he could get somebody to show up. Nobody was able to make it out because it was only like 6:30 in the morning, and where he was trying to go was about 20-30 minutes away. So after sitting there for a while, waiting for him to try and find somebody, I agreed to give him a ride out to Tacoma for $20, and he accepted it because a little bit of a trip, get something out of it. So get out to Tacoma, stop at a gas station to get some gas, and I buy this new Mountain Dew flavor. And this is where the joke comes into play. I buy this new Mountain Dew flavor, and I'm holding it up to the camera for those who are here watching. And this thing, it looks like a pineapple flavored Mountain Dew. I love pineapple. It has like this little pineapple symbol. It's called a Baja Flash. And I get to my car, I open it up, I take a drink of it, and I gag. This is pineapple coconut. It doesn't say anywhere except for in fine print, pineapple coconut. I hate coconut. If you like coconut, you might like this drink. But if you hear gagging during the podcast or live stream, it's because I'm trying not to waste my money. Or I just showed John a photo of Nancy Pelosi, and then he's gagging. So if there's gagging at all during the podcast tonight, I'm either drinking this nasty crap Mountain Dew, or John Williams just saw a photo of Nancy Pelosi's face.
or both.
Or both, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that was gross. This is the worst drink I have ever drank in my life. Don't buy it unless you are a huge fan of coconut. And even then, I'm not so sure you'll like this one.
I will tell you this. So years ago, I drank a lot of Mountain Dew, a lot of it.
Oh, same
And
here.
and suddenly, just out of the blue, every time I would eat a meal or anything, I felt nauseous, and I started kind of freaking out like this isn't good. Every time I eat, I feel nauseous, and it got to a point where I finally went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, "So what do you drink?" And I go, I drink Mountain Dew. I was like, I drink quite a bit of it. And she goes, yeah, quit that because she's like, between the caffeine and the citric acid, it's tearing your stomach up. So I just quit drinking it. I went to something else. And I don't know, 8, 10 months later, I hadn't had one drop of Mountain Dew. And I thought, well, I'll get one out of the machine. I took one sip and my stomach's like, nuh-uh. And I just went and chucked it in the trash can. And everybody's like, you just bought that. I said, listen, if you felt the way I felt when I drink Mountain Dew, you would immediately throw that crap in the trash can too because it's whew. And so I quit drinking soda altogether several years back. And I was at one or two places. I was at a family function. I think it was my wife's family. The only soda they had was like Coca Cola, which I can't stand, or Pepsi. And I thought, well, I guess I'm drinking a Pepsi. I don't know how I could ever drink soda. It's so sweet, so syrupy. I'm thinking, the heck did I drink this crap at all? Like, how did I ever put this stuff to my lips? If you quit drinking soda altogether and you go back to it, it is one of the most horrific things you'll ever do to yourself because you're from your lips to your stomach goes, yeah, yeah, don't do that. That's awful. Don't please stop doing that right now, or we'll make you regret it a half hour down the road. So I just don't drink. Yeah, I just quit drinking soda. And of course, now I'm a sweet tea addict. So it's not like I greatly improved my health because now I'm drinking tea instead of soda. But, and then I started drinking water again because I wasn't feeling quite right. And I thought, you know, dummy, you don't really drink much water anymore. So I bought a big package of Fiji water, which I absolutely love. The crap's expensive, but it tastes so good. And now I drink a big 1 liter bottle every day at work. And I actually am starting to feel a lot better because I'm so stupid that I think I wasn't severely dehydrated, but I think my internal organs were like, hey, bro, you want to just throw some of that crystal clear stuff down your throat once in a while instead of this brown sweet tea all the time? So yeah, I started drinking water and started feeling better. So Jesse, I know you said you had at least one topic that you wanted to cover today. So before we get down the road of our soda drinking horror stories, um, what's the topic at hand today?
All right, so I figure it would be a good time to talk about it since it's right after Independence Day to talk about the fight for independence and um, a lot of what happened after we had won independence. A lot of the early struggles of the United States, a lot of the fears of our founding fathers that they literally lived out and uh, just go from there. So, since we just had Independence Day, and I hope everyone had a great Independence Day, with that being said, um, during the fight for independence, a lot of people don't know this part of history, but Congress barely funded the Union Army. The Revolutionary Army that George Washington was leading was so underfunded, so underfed, so undersupplied that many soldiers starved to death and froze to death fighting against the British. Even in 100-degree weather, some were dying of heat stroke at times and didn't have excuse me, didn't have enough food or water or proper clothing for hygiene to deal with the conditions of fighting against the British. And George Washington was constantly begging Congress for funds, but Congress could not get funds because the states kept refusing to send funds under the Articles of Confederation. And uh, during this, George Washington had almost faced a mutiny among his soldiers because they knew that why are we still fighting this war if by the time this war is over, we're just going to get thrown in debtor's prison because we're all going into debt fighting this war. And some soldiers, some of our founding fathers actually did spend time in debtor's prison because they were in debt at the end of the war. And what saved George Washington was his charisma, was his renowned figure. Uh, Everyone loved George Washington because of his passion, because of his dedication, because of everything. He stood up in front of all of the officers that were getting ready to basically mutiny with the soldiers, saying, I understand your sacrifices. Look at what I have sacrificed during this conflict. I've sacrificed my career. I've sacrificed my livelihood. I've sacrificed everything for the sake of this newly found nation and liberty. And in this speech, he rallied his troops, his officers below him, and got them to stay united for the purpose of gaining independence from England. And when you fast forward to after independence had been won, um, many constitutional scholars and those in my field already know Alexander Hamilton was a very central government figure. He wanted to see the national banking system. He wanted to see a strong central government that can keep the country together. He still wanted to preserve liberty and everything of that nature. That was his full intent. But he thought that you would need a stronger government than, especially the Articles of Confederation, which the vast majority of our founding fathers agreed. We did need something stronger than the Articles of Confederation. But Alexander Hamilton wanted something even stronger than the Constitution that we were given. And this made a huge divide, and this is how we got the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. You had the ones that wanted a stronger central government, such as James Madison, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton. But even with me mentioning James Madison, he did not like Alexander Hamilton at all. Even though they both wrote the Federalist Papers, they didn't really get along. And the reason they didn't really get along was because Alexander Hamilton wanted too much government. James Madison wanted a government just strong enough to hold the nation together and get done what needs to be done. So Alexander Hamilton, as the first Secretary of Treasury to the United States under George Washington, he pushed for a national bank and got it through Congress because the Federalist Party at the time had majority. And he was able to get enough votes to found the first Bank of America. And it was, I think, a 20-year contract that got signed for the Bank of America. And Thomas Jefferson and James Madison both tried so hard to block this national bank. They both tried so hard to get it overturned. And their reasoning for being against the national bank was because they did not want so much central power controlling money. And if you look at the Federal Reserve today, you could see their fear was very warranted. And Alexander Hamilton wanted a national bank because the United States had fallen so into debt following the independence that we did not have an adequate financial system to pull ourselves back out of debt. And with that being said, Alexander Hamilton was a financial genius. And him living through the war, living through seeing what the lack of funds did for the military, what the lack of funds did for morale, what the lack of funds did to the overall health of the United States economy, he understood a drastic need to fix that. And with the U.S. banking system that he had implemented, it was such a phenomenal system, but it was formulated by Alexander Hamilton. And if you were to have a United States banking system, or even our Federal Reserve, it would probably be a fine thing under Alexander Hamilton, because he had all the right intentions. He wasn't trying to uh, plunder the country of its money for the government or for himself. He just wanted to fix the country's financials. When Thomas Jefferson had became president, the third president, he had tried to dismantle the banking system that Alexander Hamilton had put in place, and even he had come out and admitted, "I can't do anything." It's He made an incredible banking system, um, and I would actually still argue that this banking system that Alexander Hamilton put in place, which James Madison and Jefferson both made this argument as well, wasn't constitutional, because that power to have a national bank was never granted to the federal government. And some of the downfalls of the federal government, which we see to this day with the Federal Reserve, is how they control the interest rates. They control a lot of the state banks with their bonds and financials, and a lot of the anti-federalists and even some of the federalists, like James Madison, did not like that. They did not like the idea of a central banking system that could impose federal will onto the states, and it was a economic drawback that would. It's why we see inflation go up high and down low throughout the United States history, especially after the Federal Reserve got implemented in the 1910s, I think.
1913, yeah.
And when the Federal Reserve got implemented, we start seeing the economy go up and down, up and down, up and down with inflation and with valuation of money. And over the last 120 years, it's just been kind of steady going down with inflation. Well, up with inflation, down with value of money. And this is why a lot of the early founding fathers were against the banking system, because they foresaw the influence that a national banking system would have on the entire economy, and they did not want that. They gave Congress the power to regulate currency. They did not want a bank to have the power to regulate currency. And here we are today with the Federal Reserve, which, again, I would make the same argument that James Madison and Thomas Jefferson made. It's not constitutional, because it was never granted in the Constitution for the Federal Reserve to exist. There still hasn't been an amendment to give that authority. The closest amendment is the 16th Amendment for taxation, but that still doesn't have anything to do with the Federal Reserve. So a little more history about the first national bank that Hamilton had formed. One of the positives that bank initially brought to help bring us out of debt was the first banks that were established under the First National Bank. Most of them were established in large port cities, and it made it easier for the government to tax and tariff the imported and exported goods as prescribed by the Constitution. And this is one of the examples of Alexander Hamilton's financial genius. This was an orphan that came from the Caribbean at the age of, I think, 16 or 17. Just an absolute financial genius that took things into his own hands and came into New York. And he just showed his prowess throughout his lifetime of just being this real go-getter, this hard-hitting, ready to kick ass and take names financial genius. And he became George Washington's right-hand man both during the Revolution and after the revolution during his presidency. And the bank had stayed in place throughout Thomas Jefferson's presidency, and during James Madison's presidency, the 20-year contract had lapsed, and Congress was in a huge debate whether or not to renew the contract. But there were more anti-federalists in power than federalists during this time, and they decided to let it lapse. So in 1811, the U.S. Bank, or the first Federal Reserve, you could say, the First National Bank, had lapsed and ceased to exist. It really was a very brilliant system that Alexander Hamilton had put in place. But what happens after Alexander Hamilton is gone? And that's a scenario when you compare it to kings and queens, why we have a republic that we have. Same scenario. You could have the best king or queen on the planet, but what happens after they die? There's no guarantee that their son or daughter is going to be just as good or better of a king or queen. And we went away from a system like that. Having that much centralized power in a central bank would just cause the same problem on a banking scale. And you can see it to this day with our current Federal Reserve, all of the problems coming ahead with the hyperinflation, with the downturn of the value of money, with the mass printing of money. And it's not good.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, there's a book which you can find it. I believe it's either Archives or archive.org. The book is from Eustace Mullins. It's called The London Connection: A History of the Federal Reserve. And what they did initially, and it worked, was there was the Aldrich Plan. A senator by the name of Nathan Aldrich, he drew up a bill, and then these shysters, these other bankers, they went to Jekyll Island, had a meeting. They had the Federal Reserve Act, and basically what they did is the same thing they do today. You can have two of the same basic bills, but what the authors and the creators of the Federal Reserve Act did is they made the Aldrich Plan sound horrific. But Aldrich's plan and the Federal Reserve Act's plan were basically essentially the same exact thing. What they also did was, they waited till a lot of the Congress was at home on Christmas break when they decided to pass the act. So they didn't have enough people there to fight against it. So the Federal Reserve Bank's initial start, the whole thing is shady, and it was done in a very underhanded way, and now we're stuck with the problem that's preached a lot about central banks is you have perpetual wars. When you have a central bank in any country, the wars seem to be just perpetual, and it's because the banks fund both sides of the war. They loan money to both sides. These national banks fund both sides because they become rich off the wars. And even with the World Bank, what they do, they go to these countries and say, we'll give you a loan, and we'll help you build infrastructure, and we'll help you do all these things. Now, mind you, that the loans are structured to never be paid off. That's number one.
Yep.
And then number two is if they take it, so if they say, okay, yes, that'll be great, then all these outside corporations come in, they get these huge contracts to build the electrical infrastructure, oil drilling, all this stuff. But number two is if they decide they won't take the money, go back and look through history and see how many of these leaders, whether good or bad, have been deposed and someone put in their place who will take the money, who will be under the thumb of the world banks, and that for that the countries the rest of their existence, they will be tied to this loan with these ungodly high interest rates. So the banks initially, just like our Federal Reserve has kind of taken over government, the world banks take over several government, several governments around the world. So central banks are just anymore they suck up power. They tinker with interest rates. They cause inflation by devaluation of the currency, and our currency is no longer back. Nixon took us off the gold standard.
Yeah.
They don't even know if there's any gold at Fort Knox anymore. They won't let. Ron Paul even stated they won't let anybody in there to see. So we don't even know if there's actual gold in Fort Knox anymore because they won't let anyone from Congress nor the president in to see what's in store there, what's in storage. So central banks are a cancer upon any nation, especially these days with the way these banks are. They're a cancer upon any nation who would have one. It's just perpetual war, and I think at times our dollar may be worth 3 to 4 cents, depending on how things are going at the time. And then you see some of these countries go negative interest rates. I think Iceland was one of those. Iceland or Greece ended up with negative interest rates, which means you get charged for money in they charge you interest that goes to the bank from your account. Instead of you drawing interest from the bank is drawing interest from you. All these things stemming from one thing, a central bank. And again, as Jesse stated, there is nothing in the Constitution about having a supposed private bank in charge of the money. Congress is supposed to be in charge of minting the coin and in charge of the currency. And our congressmen basically just gave it up. Now, there's a book out, and I can't remember the name of it or the author, so forgive me. I think it's called The Law That Never Was. These guys, these gentlemen they go to each state and research. Did 2/3 of the states ratify the 16th Amendment to the Constitution? And from their research, they have come to the conclusion, no, they did not. We've actually had a Supreme Court justice say the same thing. 2/3 of the states did not ratify the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, and therefore, logically, making the 16th Amendment illegal. But until enough people, again, we preach this all the time. Jesse and I both preach this all the time. Until the people research, do their research, and come to the same conclusion to realize that for their whole working lives have been getting screwed by a private bank, this will not end.
Yep. Yep. I think it's still a little debatable on whether or not the 2/3 of states ratified the 16th. It's kind of something that's a little bit lost in history to have a legitimate case on at this point. But with regards to what you said on how Congress had passed that one bill while a lot of them were on vacation, sneaking it through. How are they able to do that? Isn't there supposed to be a quorum? And in addition to isn't there supposed to be a quorum? Why were the other representatives so damn lazy that when they returned, they weren't like, what the hell is this? And it immediately put a bill to the floor to say, no, we're overturning this.
Right.
Because if there's enough votes to tone it down, logic tells you that there's enough votes to repeal it. Why didn't they repeal it immediately after coming back from their vacation?
I think it's one of those things where so many people have, from my understanding from the Eustace Mullins book, even those who returned, what had happened, throughout history, it's not we don't want to sit here and make it sound like any banking system is perfect, because there were bad times in the economies. It had a bad dip. The difference is when you don't have a central bank like the Federal Reserve, those instances correct within a few months, maybe 6 months, a year tops. When we
Yep.
have a Federal Reserve, when we have what we had in 2008, it's literally years of recovery, years of recovery. And I think what happened is a lot of them were so convinced that this Federal Reserve Act was going to keep those those dips in the economy, just keep them at bay because they were going to be better able to correct these situations quicker. And I think a lot of them are probably turning over in their graves, realizing how wrong they were. Because again, when you have a central bank and someone's messing with the interest rates and causing such horrible inflation, it's not going to correct. I mean, Ron Paul was out there in what 2012 beating this drum saying if we just get rid of the Federal Reserve and we got rid of the income tax in these lulls and these really bad times in the economy, literally within 3 to 6 months, they would be corrected. Or, in fact, the way he talked, which Ron Paul's pretty much dead on when he makes and when he says something's going to happen in the economy, it ends up happening every time. He's
Yep.
called it every time. He said within 3 to 6 months, the economy would skyrocket up, and we would probably never see a more prosperous time than if you got rid of those two things. And it's not a stretch to go, hey, what happens if you got to keep that other 22 or however many, however much percent of your check goes out to federal income tax? What happens if you got to keep that 15, 20% of your check every week? Most people are going to say, I could buy this, I could buy that, I could buy more groceries, I could fix up my house, whatever. The economy is going to gain so much traction
Yep.
and be so much better. But again, this can't all fall on the Federal Reserve Bank. It falls on our institutions of learning, and it falls on people to know better and to keep track of what their Federal Reserve System and their government is doing. And for those who don't know, every time our government comes up with a program and says, we need $500 billion for this program, the Federal Reserve prints the money, and
Yep.
then they charge the government, which is actually us, interest on every dollar printed.
Yep.
So your income tax that comes out of your check only pays, all that money simply goes to pay the interest owed to the Federal Reserve Bank. It doesn't go to programs. It goes right to a bank. So there is a bank out there who literally has rights to take a chunk out of the money you earned for your labor, because we had a bunch of idiots in Congress who fell for this act hook, line, and sinker.
Yep. And with that being said, there is a little bit of a misconception by a lot of people that China owns the vast majority of our debt. They own a big chunk. They own 13% as of 2018. And honestly, Japan's right there with them. Japan owns 12% as of 2018. Yes. But they do not own a big chunk. As of 2018, 39.5% of the U.S. debt is to U.S. individuals and institutions. And a tack on an additional 10.8% of the debt is to the Federal Reserve. So all of this debt, we're up to $23 trillion in debt. Do you know how much interest we pay on that debt a year?
Oh.
$378 billion. $378 billion that we just piss away every year to our debt. Money that's going away for literally no reason, because we've assumed so much debt, because we've spent so much money unnecessarily. How much of our budget is covered by $378 billion? Now, let me pull up the U.S. budget. So what could $378 billion do for the U.S. budget? Let's see if I can find a good budget chart here. Oh, let's see. Okay, so um, the chart that I just found is a 2015 chart, and as of 2015, our military budget was 600, just shy of $600 billion. Um, government spending was 72.9 billion. Education was 70 billion, which that's another thing the federal government has no damn business being in. But another topic. Here's one: medical and healthcare, 66 billion. Another one: the U.S. government has no business being in that. Environment, energy and environment, 39.1 billion. No business being in that. But let's say that they did have a business being in that. You eliminate that debt, you pay for education, medical and health, and energy and environment. Done. It's paid for just by not paying the interest rate. Not saying we should, because we definitely should not. Not the federal responsibility. But it's just an example of it. There is so much that we are dumping into debt interest rates that it's perpetuating itself now. When 10% of the budget, the entire federal budget, is going to debt interest rates, we have a freaking problem.
Yeah, and I'm seeing here from the Congressional Budget Office the budget projections for fiscal year 2021 as of July 1st, 2021. The outlays $6.8 trillion, revenues $3.8 trillion, a deficit of $3 trillion for 1 year.
Yeah.
1 year.
Yeah. And I mean, and when you think about that, that's $1/3 of $1 trillion is going to the debt repayment. So, of the $3 trillion deficit, we have what? 1/12 of that is going to interest rates. That's a big ass chunk of $3 trillion. It's a huge chunk of $3 trillion going to interest payments. It's not sustainable. We have to get out of the system. We have to end this ridiculous perpetual debt. What happens when and if the United States defaults on its debt? What happens then? Do we just print more money? That's one of the things we actually did during our Revolutionary War, because we couldn't get the states to pony up their end of the bargain in the Revolutionary War. Congress had more money printed, and it devalued the money so bad that the soldiers, when they were paid with this devalued money, they couldn't even buy bread. They still starved to death, even when Congress finally funded them, because they funded them with mass printed money. There was a phrase that was used during the Revolutionary War: "It's not worth a colonial." Basically, it's not worth a pile of crap.
Just like our currency now. I think, and it's just it's mind blowing the amount of debt that this country piles up in a matter of months when these morons decide that the government needs to intervene on something, that they must get in there and spend money to correct an issue. And anybody with more than 2 brain cells rubbed together, how many times, it doesn't matter if they're a Democrat or Republican, most people that you would ask to say, hey, you think the government spends money wisely? Most of them are going to say, no, they don't. We know they waste money. Then why on God's green earth do we continue to accept the fact that government's just going to spend money and there's nothing we can do about it? There's plenty we can do about it. Yeah. But you have to stand up at some point and say, hey, idiot, you want to get your government hand out of my pocket?
Yeah.
You know, There's that funny meme that says it was so cold out today that I actually saw a politician with his hand in his own pockets.
Yeah.
That's a joke that's all over social media. So why are people so willing to accept the government's just going to spend money? And the other part of the problem is there are financial people out there, economists out there saying you can never have too much debt. You can just keep printing money and to get yourself out of debt. Well, sure, you can keep printing money if we want to be like Venezuela or
Yeah.
Russia or what was it? The Weimar Republic, all those things where the money is literally you're going to pay $1 million for a loaf of bread. Sure, I mean, I guess if we want to go that way, but this fallacy that well, you can just never. There's just never too much debt. Any that that whole premise says that I can just go. I should be able to go out and buy 10 new cars, and when the bank turns me down, go, hey, I'm just like the feds. There can never be too much debt. You'll get the money somehow. It, I can't do that. You can't do that. The only institution that can do that is government because they have a bunch of paid idiots out there screaming at the top of their lungs that you can never have too much debt. And Jacob Turner, who's joined us on the live stream, says we have to end the Fed.
Yeah.
Absolutely, we have to end the Fed.
Yeah.
And here's my concern because I know Ron Paul and some others drafted, audit the Fed. My one concern with audit the Fed was, especially way this some in the government and the media act, is if this audit the Fed ever went through and people saw how bad it was, the media and these world banks and several politicians would all combine powers to say, oh, you know what we need to do? We need to join the IMF, international, because they'll be better. Instead of people getting turned to,
let's make it
hey,
bigger.
Let's go to a gold standard, and we can only print money for what we have in holdings. No, we'll go bigger.
Yeah.
So then the debt gets worse, the devaluation of the dollar gets worse. All these things get worse because people will be pushed to they won't there too many people will ignore the fact that a central bank was the cause of a lot of their problems financially instead of saying let's go back to the way we started out. I'm afraid that people will go the opposite way and go in the worst direction if we don't have enough people educated on the facts. And that's up to people like me and Jesse and others who are in this movement, but it's also up to the family, the parents of the children and things of that nature, and getting people in office, especially in local areas, who are going to be level-headed and speak the truth and spend wisely and all these things. But it's a massive undertaking to get enough people to say, hey, central banks are bad. Doesn't matter if it's in your country or international. A centralized monetary body who has control of the money supply is never, ever a good idea.
Yep, that's actually why I'm running for a public utility position right now, because I'm not in a position that can run for any kind of legislative role yet, and so it's a type of position that you can throw your name on the ballot. You don't really have to do much campaigning unless you're really wanting the spot. So I just threw my name on the ballot. If I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't. And if I get it, it's going to be a fiscal responsibility position. I'm not going to spend money we don't have. That's all there is to it. It's an administrative role position. I don't really want an administrative role. I hate the administration. But it's a role that exists, and it was a spot that was open, so I threw my hat in the ring, figured if I get it, it's experience, and I can put my fiscal responsible mind in play and just not spend money that we don't have. And when you were speaking, you actually brought up Venezuela with how they just mass printed money. So, funny story about Venezuela. Do you know how much a Big Mac costs in Venezuela?
No, I haven't heard that figure before.
All right, put a guess out there. And I'm not talking U.S. dollars. I'm talking Bolivar, or whatever the currency is called. I know the currency is named after Simon Bolivar, but
I'll say 50,000.
oh man, you are not even in the ballpark. 17.5 million bolivars for a Big Mac. That's how much they have mass printed their money. That's how much they have devalued their money. A Big Mac in Venezuela costs 17.5 million bolivars.
Okay, all I'm going to say is if I go to Venezuela and buy a Big Mac, that thing better move back when I take a bite for that much money.
Well, on the bright side, if you're paying in US dollars, it's only like $5 or $6. But yeah, they've mass printed their money so much that they've devalued it that $17.5 million equates to $5 or $6 for a US dollar. Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
Here's something funny, just so people kind of get an idea. Where I work, there are people that are there from Honduras, Guatemala, some other countries, and I was talking to them about, they said the guy from Guatemala, I think he's from Guatemala, said that if you go down there, he said the culture's so different. He said you can literally just be going up roads and there's fresh produce everywhere. He said in our country, we don't have freezers full of food. Everything you buy there is fresh. And if you go to Honduras or another country and you go to a restaurant and you eat, let's say you might spend US dollars $3 to $5 for a plate. And they said the plate is so full of food that you can't even finish it. And that's just every restaurant. It's just so funny to me how different our cultures are. But then, their current, and this is not saying that the Federal Reserve is awesome, because I'm not saying that. But the difference in banking, we have it bad in this country and it's about to get real bad. But man, some other countries, whew.
Well, that's the thing. You look at the path that we're going down. This is the exact path that they have already been down. And that's why they are in their situation. And when you look at the situation that they are in, that Cuba's in right now, trying to oust their communist leadership right now. And
Whoa. They're not mad at their communist leadership. They're mad that there's not vaccines there. How dare you?
Yeah. Oh man, that's why they're waving U.S. flags there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That funny, isn't it? How every country that rebels against communism, Hong Kong, Cuba, Venezuela, even France when they had their thing going on, Greece when they had their thing going on, they all wave American flags. Oh, I wonder why that is.
And we're like, and according to some of these Marxists that we have in office, we're the worst country on the face of the earth.
Right.
We're super racist, and we just are awful to everyone.
Yeah, all these communist countries that are turning their back on communism. All the people are starting to riot against communism. They fly American flags, and why, if we're that bad of a country? Yeah. We obviously are. One thing that our founding fathers put in place that still stands true today, we're still that shining beacon for liberty. Unfortunately, our government is turning its back on that, and I don't know how much longer we're going to be that shining beacon of liberty. How much longer is the rest of the world going to look at the United States and be, that's the example we want to live by, when they want to live free?
You bring that up, and what's interesting is I came across, I don't know if it was a YouTube video or what. It was from Australia, Now, this might have been a more conservative news station, but they were playing clips of Biden, and one of the journalists said, "You have a president that couldn't find his way home in the dark." Like basically, what are you people doing? So even though that the other countries think Biden's just the best thing since sliced bread, there's a lot of journalists in other countries going, I don't know what y'all smoked. That was some bad weed you got a hold of, but this dude, no bueno. No bueno.
Well, look at that
And
G8 summit. Look at how much of a laughing stock he was at the G8 summit. I mean, you had the
it's
media and other world leaders laughing at him, and he was oblivious. He didn't know what they were laughing at. He tried to join them in laughing. He saw others laughing, so he thought he needed to laugh.
I want to make something clear. Even though I don't agree with Joe Biden's policies, I don't think he's probably got one policy that I agree with. I feel sorry for him
Oh, same here.
because he's being used by the party to foment whatever they're trying to accomplish. And he's just this guy with severe health issues being used as a puppet. And for any of these idiots to come out and say they're compassionate people, right there, that one statement should make you do a 180 and walk away from them. And for those who choose to ignore that the president has severe medical issues and probably doesn't know where he is half the time, and his questions have to be combed through. His answers for those questions, selected questions, are written down.
And he even struggles with that.
Yeah, and for people to ignore that is just mind-boggling. But it all falls back onto the point that I know, Jesse, you stressed a lot. Who the president is should not affect us that much, constitutionally speaking. Just if Biden could be president 150 years ago, and people would be like, okay, but
why did the delegates pick him? Yeah.
Right. But he would come out and say something, they'd be like, okay, Cracky Crackerson, I don't know what you're talking about, but we're going to ignore that.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I want to mention something before we move on. The government's saying they're going to get in social media sites and start blocking people or, deplatforming people if they're spreading misinformation. I have to say one thing, because we're seeing in states with Biden's election that the states are they're signing these bills into law about the Second Amendment Preservation Act and other things. Some states are saying they legislation with a blank slate saying anything the federal government does, any law they pass, if it's unconstitutional, we're going to ignore it. This, I have to give a little, I guess, a credit to Biden, because he's so off the wall, and his administration is more Marxist than we've seen in a while, that states are like, yeah, we're going to take a hard pass on that.
Yeah.
And also, this may lead to a new type of platform that comes out from people saying, okay, you're going to deplatform this whole group of people because, I don't know, we like freedom and we talk out a bit, talk out about, or talk against your nonsense, speak out against it. That's fine. We'll design our own platform. There may be some positives that come out of this. We may see new things come out of this because people get fed up. And it'll be great because Facebook and some of these other will lose funding if people finally say, okay, dude, that's fine. You want to play this stupid game, you'll win stupid prizes, and they move away from it. This could be a silver lining. I'm not saying that's absolutely true, because I don't see into the future, but the way the states have been acting lately, this could be a positive thing, where not only is it with laws, but innovation and technology and some of these platforms, we could see new things rise out of this. Because as history has shown, any almost anywhere where there's overreach by governments or whatever, there's always people around who want to say, okay, you're going to do that. We'll do this instead.
You
A
know,
lot of times the government has to play catch up
there's a
because
physics
somebody
phrase.
says,
There's a
what's
physics
that?
phrase that applies
Okay.
just as well to this. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And you will see that in politics just as much as you see that in physics.
Yes.
What would happen? What would happen if they literally passed a gun confiscation bill? There would be a big pushback to such an extreme bill. And you mentioned the deplatforming and seeing that people are starting to look for alternatives and make their own alternatives. Saying that if you're going to deplatform me there, I'll make my own platform and you can shove it. That's a great thing. But you also mentioned how there are states that are saying, no, we're not going to follow the unconstitutional laws that you're passing. That is where I see a lot of the big promise coming out of this. And I'm really hopeful that that is a trend that takes off like a bat out of hell. Because we need that again. We need states to reassert themselves, to remind the federal government that you don't control us, we control you. You did not create the states, we created you. The government, the only time the government had involvement in creating states, and I wouldn't even say it's creating states, it's helping define the borders of the states. Because the borders of the states, once they were formed, they still needed to apply for statehood. You look at Texas, for example, when they came into the Union, they had claims all the way up into, I think, Kansas. And their borders got cut down to where they are now. They had parts of Oklahoma and parts of Kansas in their territorial claims. But beyond helping settle border disputes among the states still they're what formed the federal government, and they joined in the union for the equal protections and equal benefits of the trade union. They didn't join the union to be controlled by the central government, because why would you join a government, a national body system like that, that's going to take away all of your authority? There's no sane state would do that, especially during the times that those states were formed and joined the union. And we used to have a time period before and even a little after the Civil War where people had a state pride, you could say. They had loyalty to their state before they had loyalty to the federal government. You were a citizen of your state before you were a citizen of your federal government. This state identity that people had is why our Civil War was as brutal as it was because the people of Mississippi were the people of Mississippi. The people of Tennessee were the people of Tennessee. The people of Virginia were the people of Virginia. The people of New York were the people of New York. Ohioans were Ohioans before they were Americans. And this is why it was so brutal, because people fought for their state more so than they fought for the Union or the Confederacy. And the best example of that is Robert E. Lee. He, before the Civil War broke out, he said there's a dreadful war coming if we can't prevent it. And he also said he is against secession. He's against the war. He's against slavery. But he fought for his state. That's why he was with the South. If Virginia went with the North, he would have fought with the North. And that's something that a lot of people forget about the Civil War. And before and after the Civil War, is there was a state identity that people had their pride of where they came from, and they wanted their representatives to represent their interests within their state, and they wanted their senators to represent their state interests within the federal government. And after the Civil War, especially when you get into the early 1900s, we fell off a cliff with all of that, especially after World War One. When we gotten our first big global conflict, a lot of the state identity kind of went out the window because we became this national body that was, hey, we're a world figure now. We need to take advantage of that, was kind of the mentality that took over. And then especially after World War II was when we totally abandoned the state identity. And that's why probably the only state that truly holds to that still is Texas. Texas is still a state that we're Texans. I don't hear anyone else be like, I'm an Ohioan, I'm a Floridian, I'm a Washingtonian, I'm a Californian. Even though California has its identity, nobody takes that like I'm proud I'm a Californian. Texas still has their state pride. They still have the I'm a Texan. I'm a Texan before I'm an American. That's the only state I know that does that. Do you know of any other state that does that?
No, and I would say that's why there's probably been so much talk out of Texas over the last decade or better about seceding from the Union.
Yeah.
I think that's why that talk is so much more frequent there, is because I think if people in Texas had their way, they'd be their own country at times, because they're just, they're for the most part, not all of them, but a big majority of them just want to be left alone. And the way their economy and stuff is, they've kind of got it set up a little better. I don't think they have a state income tax there. Of course, Florida doesn't either. And that's why right now, and people, I think some of these governors should take notice of this, that especially after this whole COVID thing and other type of state debacles, not just federal, but statewide, New York, California, some of these other states, Michigan, people are flocking there, going to Florida, going to Texas, other states with no state income tax,
Yep.
and much more relaxed laws and things like that. And they're seeing this and going, man, look at what they're doing.
Yep.
What's their deal? Well, a lot of it is, or at least a big portion of it is the government is not so overreaching, but also it's its constituents, it's citizens saying, we don't put up with that kind of nonsense. You bring that up, we'll knock it back down because you're out of your flipping mind. So good state government. I wish Missouri would see a little more of this. I know Rick Combs has brought this up before, that he would end the corporate tax, because as far as the budget goes in Missouri, the corporate tax only makes up like 4 or 5% of the revenue. You want to bring business into Missouri, let's eliminate the corporate tax. That's a heck of a start. Bring more jobs for people, up the economy.
Yep.
But we have too many state representatives who look at that and go, we can't do that, and we sure as heck can't get rid of the personal property tax. And instead of alleviating the tax on the people or the corporations, we'll just up the gas, the gas tax by 12.5 cents, which, they were working on a referendum to bring that back to the voters of Missouri, and I haven't heard anything on it lately. I know the governor just signed it into law a few days ago, so sometime in October, it's going to go up 2.5 cents a gallon. And for the next 4 years, or actually, and 5 years total, it's going to go up 12.5 cents. So every year for 5 years, it's going to go up 2.5 cents. Now, I know what people are going to think. Well, it's only 2.5 cents. Well, when you get to the end of the 5 years, and depending on how our economy is, and depending on who's in office, that 12.5 cents could really hurt your pocketbook in the end. And again, I keep beating this like a dead horse, I know, but we have a lot of Republicans. This state is highly Republican, unless you go to St. Louis, Kansas City, That's about the only two areas. Maybe central around Columbia, Missouri. That's a little more liberal. We have two big metropolitan areas that are a lot more liberal. The rest of the state's pretty much conservative. But we have people voting for conservatives who got behind the gas tax. And so um, this is why guys like Robert Smith, who are talking about running for the Missouri House, that's why I want to see guys like him in. Um, because I have no doubt in my mind that Robert is going to stand up and go, "Have you lost your mind?
Yeah, same
Why
here.
are we doing this to the people? Why are we raising their taxes at a time one because of bureaucrats and health department heads and everything else almost destroyed the economy, and now we want to raise the tax on people." So I would hope, I wish and hope that determination of a lot of people in Texas. I wish that kind of mentality would spread to the other states,
Yeah, same here.
to where people grabbed a hold of it and said, "Yeah, look at what they're doing." Because Abbott has been signing laws like crazy, saying, "Okay, feds." I mean, literally, just every time he turns around, half the time he's given the feds the bird, and I absolutely love it. I wish that mentality would spread to more states, because you think about it, you get half the states, even just half the states saying, "We're going to nullify any federal law we deem unconstitutional." The federal government loses so much power
Yep.
in doing that, that when they do something, half the country goes, "Yeah, whatever." And it's, yeah, the other states will take it seriously, but when half the country goes, "Yeah, we're not going to do that," I don't see anything in the Constitution where that's legal. Um, the federal government loses its credibility, and it loses a lot of power because states are learning to fend for themselves and ignore the federal government. Now, again, like we've both stated before on this show, a lot of the problem is when you go against the feds, they start taking some of that federal money, the highway
Yep.
funds or whatever. And this is where you have to get fiscally responsible people into office that says, "Okay, well, we'll figure out a way around this somehow. We'll get our economy rolling so much that you're these missing federal tax dollars won't mean a thing, because we've made up the money ourselves." It's just going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of education. It's going to take the right people at a local level to further this mentality and get people to understand. And I think if you could get a few states to do it, Missouri, Texas, whoever, and get to that point where other states go, "Whoa, bro, do you see what they're doing? We need to talk to them and see how they're handling this." It takes a couple of states to do it, succeed, and it's just like anything else in life. A lot of people don't want to take the risk, but somebody will. They'll succeed, and they'll even get out there and say, "This is how I did it." And other people go, "Oh, it was that easy? Yeah, it was that easy. This is all I had to do."
Yep.
Get a couple states on board, get that rolling, get that message of liberty and freedom going, and that independence from the federal government, and it could be a huge W, be a check mark in the win column. But it's that pendulum back and forth from conservative to liberal in the federal government, and then even in the state houses in some states. Um, but yeah, I'm kind of happy with what Missouri's been doing, but the gas tax was a disappointment. I'm hoping that some of the people that have been getting elected lately, and some of them that are due to be term limited out, I'm hoping that I see an expansion on what we've been seeing, where we're getting much more like the conservative caucus, which is a constitutional type of group, people like that getting more of their type into the state houses, where we don't worry about a tax increase. We'll see a tax decrease. We'll see some loosening of regulations, so on, and liabilities, and so on and so forth. That, I mean, honestly, to me, that's the only positive you can take out of a administration like Obama had or a Biden has, um, is that states go, you clearly you're clearly not playing with a full deck. So let us help you with that. We'll just ignore everything you say. That's the only that's the only silver lining to an administration like this is you have people who are much more inclined to freedom in these states saying, hey, can we just ignore what they do? And you get enough good people in office and they'll go,
Yep.
absolutely, we can ignore what we do because they're educated in the Constitution and they know what they can and can't do. And they know that the states are supposed to be sovereign from the get go. And they know that if the federal government passes any law that is unconstitutional, which is supposed to be null and void at that point, and we have enough constitutional people in office, they know that too. And they can push the idea that we don't have to follow along with this. We can just ignore it because we don't have to enforce it. And the feds don't have near enough people to come into all these states and enforce this law. They're too shorthanded. And
Yep.
that is a silver lining in and of itself.
Yep, I agree wholeheartedly. Because states needing to reassert themselves, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast already, is the most vital power of the states, in my opinion, to be able to reassert themselves against the federal government and just tell the federal government no. Because the way I word it is we are not states of a nation. We are a nation of states.
Absolutely.
And the federal government is like a child that's never told no. It's a spoiled brat that keeps spending your money because it's not being told no. You're giving it a blank check credit card and saying, go do what you want, instead of telling the federal government no. And the states are the parents of this federal government. They are the check that the people have against the federal government. The states are their own sovereign nations within the union. Because that's what our nation is. It's a union. It's not a single national body, or at least that's not what it's supposed to be. So these states need to hold the federal government in check and tell it no. Say, I don't care. I don't give a crap how much of a fit you throw. I'm not giving you any more blank checks to spend my money however you want. You spend the money within the confines of the Constitution that have been agreed upon, or you're grounded.
Yeah. I mentioned this last week that, and I've mentioned it several times, you're talking about a child. I've mentioned several times that, and I still hold to this, that when you're a kid and you're growing up, your parents set all these rules and that you got certain chores to do. You got to do this, that, and that before you can do this. And I just say to people all the time, remember when you were a kid and you said, I can't wait to grow up and get out of the house so I can do my own thing without having to ask permission. And then you get out of high school and maybe you go to college or maybe you go to tech school and you get out and you get a job, you get married, you have kids, you have a house. And what do? You go around asking permission for everything and then paying an extortion fee to your government. Where has that mentality of the child gone? That's one of the truths that children hold in their mind a lot. I can't wait to get out on my own and do what I want. And we've lost that mentality. And that's part of that's part of childhood that we should hold on to. That's really part of our childhood that we should hold on to for the rest of our lives.
Yep.
I just want to do my own thing and be left alone. I won't hurt anybody. I won't harm anyone. I won't demand that people do things for me. I will just try to live my life as best I can without having to ask permission every time I turn around because I'm a sovereign. And kids don't think like in the term of I'm a sovereign individual, but again, they have that mindset because they haven't been they haven't been tainted by the education system.
Yeah.
And they're not learned enough to go, oh man, watching their parents, they hear their parents talk about the bills and things like that, but they don't have a grasp on it until they get older. But that mentality of just leave me alone and let me do my own thing. I promise I won't harm anyone else. That's just been lost on a lot of people.
Yes.
I really wish we could get that back.
And I was very fortunate as a kid for a couple aspects, both because I had a maturity that surpassed most kids, like extreme. And the other fortunate side of it is my parents recognized that. At 13, 14, 15, 16, I could go out at night, whenever, as long as I wanted, because they knew I wasn't going to cause trouble. I wasn't going to do anything stupid. And I had a lot of liberty. And in my mind, I wanted to keep that liberty. I wasn't going to do something stupid and lose my liberty. I wanted to maintain that liberty. As a teenager, I was hell bent not to get in trouble because I wanted to maintain that liberty. I didn't want to be stuck in the house. I didn't want to be stuck in my room. I didn't want to not be able to go see my friends. I wasn't going to cause trouble. There's no reason for it anyway, really, but I valued the liberty that I had and the trust that I had. So I made sure to do what was right and not cause trouble because I wanted to maintain that liberty. And that's one thing that stuck with me to this day is I want to maintain my liberty. I haven't done anything wrong, so why is the government right now depriving me of a lot of my liberties? And it drives me crazy. It's like we're in a caged freaking box and the government's just keeping us there whether we've done anything wrong or not. I have a phrase that I came up with a couple years ago, and it's, "Are you a free man?" And most people will say yes, because they're like, yeah, I'm in the freest country in the world. And then I followed up with, or are you permitted to be free?
Yes.
Yeah. And therein lies the problem. We're being permitted to be free. Because you can't freely go fishing. You can't freely go hunting. You have to get licenses for both. You have to get licenses to travel. You can't fly on a plane unless the government basically gives you permission now. They can blacklist you from flying a plane just because of a Facebook post. They could throw you on some kind of ridiculous watch list for a Facebook post because you made a joke and keep you from flying. You're permitted to be free. It's a scenario where if you're a slave and there's a slave master and you want to go to the store, "Master, may I go to the store?" Yeah, sure. That's the scenario we live in America right now. While going to the store isn't necessarily a permitted thing by the government, that's the concept of where we're at in America right now. We have a constitutional and natural right to bear arms in defense of ourselves, our state, and our nation. But what does the government do? Do you have a permit for that gun? Do you have a permit to carry that? Do you have a permit to buy that? I shouldn't need a permit to buy it or carry it. I have a right to keep and bear arms. And the Supreme...
it's funny too because there's a I need to sit down and watch this show because Parks and Recreation just to watch Ron Swanson. And there's a clip where he's at the park and I don't remember what he's doing. He's setting up a barbecue grill or something. It's like park ranger comes over and goes, "Hey, do you have a permission slip or you have a permit for that?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And he hands the park ranger a piece of paper and he opens it up and it says, "I can do whatever I want." And the park ranger's just like, "This isn't a permit." And he's like, yeah, it is. And he's just that dude that even though he works for the Parks Department, Parks and Recreation, you could tell government is not his friend. And it's just a classic, yeah, I can do whatever I want. And the park ranger's like, "Yeah, that's not a permit." And he's like, yes, it is a permit. I can do whatever I want. And I think, that's also the kind of mentality that people have to have too. There's a John Stossel video out. I could play it, but I'm not going to. I think the title of it's like "Don't Ask Permission" or something, and they're talking about certain businesses. Elon Musk, 23andMe. Some of these other businesses didn't ask the FDA or whoever for permission. They just went out and did it.
Yep.
And we kind of need that mentality amongst people too that says, I don't have to ask your permission. And following up on your comment about are you free or are you permitted to be free? That's a question that I've posed to my audience is, or not a question, but a statement. You can do anything you want as long as you have the government's permission to do so.
Yeah.
That doesn't make you a free person.
Yeah.
That makes you, in part, a slave, and government is acting like the master. And you know, every week, every podcast, I get tired of saying it, but it's true. Things are continually, as far as freedom goes, getting worse. And I noticed, I hate talking about this. I'm so sick of talking about it, but I can't let it go. I saw a headline for an article today, and it was from some hospital here in Missouri. And I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to fear people into a certain situation. They said it's going to be worse than it was in November with this whole COVID thing. Now, how do you know? How do you know that?
If
And
they
B,
know that, why do they know that? Yeah.
right. And all it is because Missouri, which I'm rather proud of myself, Missouri has one of the lowest vaccination rates, especially in certain parts of the state in the country. And that makes me proud. And a lot of people don't like it when I say that, but it makes me proud that people and that Missouri has one of the lowest vaccination rates. That means to me that a lot of people in Missouri know how to think for themselves. That's what that tells me. They don't automatically cower to fear and say, oh my God, I got to go out and get this vaccination so we can go back to normal. A lot of people are saying, screw you, I'm not taking your vaccine. Now, some of it is political. I'm going to say some of it's political, but Missouri, we are fortunate that we live in a state that for the most part is a little more freedom oriented than a lot of other states.
Yeah.
And that's something to be proud of, but we still have a lot of work to do to build upon that mentality and that structure. But I'm thinking you all are already trying to ramp up the fear. What is it? Not Cole County, but Boone County, where Columbia, Missouri sits. They've already said we're sending people door to door to see if we can get more people vaccinated.
Yep, I've seen a couple examples of that pop up in the news now. I don't remember where, but I've seen a couple examples of that pop up now where they're sending people out. Originally, they were just sending people out, hey, are you interested in getting a vaccine, and set up a scheduling date. And then they started bringing health officials out with vaccines ready to go, going door to door. Hey, you don't even have to make an appointment. We can take care of you right now if you want it.
Yeah, and that's the key word. We can take care of you right now. In my opinion, I'm sorry, experimental vaccines, don't want any part of it, don't want anything to do with it. But when someone goes from the government says, I'm here to take care of you, you should run the other way immediately.
Yeah, and with regards to the vaccine, I'm on the same page as you. I'm not getting it. At the very least, I'm not getting it until it's tried and tested. And that being said, I have nothing against those who do get it. But my suggestion to everyone, don't cave to fear. Make an informed decision on whether or not to get it. Make an informed decision. Don't get it just because somebody told you to get it. Get it with an informed decision. And this should apply to all medical procedures, whether it's the COVID vaccine, a flu vaccine, or whatever. Make informed decisions. Know what the potential side effects are. We don't know what the potential side effects are because it hasn't been tested on humans yet. We are the test. So you can't make an informed decision on a vaccine that has been rushed and does not have human testing and is in its active roles right now. What might the side effects be a year from now, 2 years from now? We don't know yet.
No. And but that's the most frightening part is that people, and it worked. We got to give the government and the media it's due, because they pushed the fear well enough to get a lot of people who wouldn't normally take a vaccine like that to take it, just to get back to normal.
Yes.
And that, and what I can't get people to understand is, okay, they're doing this now. Let's say they don't mandatorily make people take vaccines unless you like work in the health industry. But let's say nationwide there's no mandatory vaccination. But because so many people cave to fear, just like 9/11, the next time,
Patriot Act.
yep, the next time, it's going to be much easier to get more people to cave.
Yep.
The potential is there. And I thought after 9/11 and seeing the uproar on some of the things that happened, that when we got here, it wouldn't get worse, and it got worse. So as much as I want to hold out hope for humanity, that next time they'll go be like, hey, last time this happened, you lied, you changed your mind every 2 days, and you got to take this vaccine where you got in Israel, they're saying, oh, you got a lot of, young men now with swelling of the heart, enlarging of the heart after this vaccine. They would hear things like that. And after the swine flu deal in the 1970s, where all these people ended up with Guillain-Barré syndrome, things of that nature, and the swine flu wasn't even that freaking deadly to begin with, but people there's way too many people that just fall right into line up, and it's like, what happens if we would become like Nazi Germany? What happens if we become that tyrannical? We've already seen people telling on their neighbors.
Yeah.
I can't imagine us getting to a point where, like Facebook's doing, like, are you being, exposed to extremist content? If that keeps pushing out into society and more people fall for that.
Yeah, that being said, could you imagine if Nazi Germany had the technology that we have today? The amount of propaganda that they would have been spewing into people's living rooms. I mean, think of what Joseph Goebbels would have done with Facebook in Germany. Think of what he would have done with YouTube, with the way that they could do the, have you been exposed to Jews? Have you been exposed to communists? Have you been exposed to Polacks? I mean, think about how he could have taken advantage of that and had people snitch on each other over the internet anonymously so easily.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a terrifying thought. If Nazi Germany had the technology that we have today, how easy it would have been to snitch on your family and neighbors.
And that's the thing too, is that technology is such a blessing and a curse at the same time.
Yeah, and there's another thing. Imagine the iPhone in Nazi Germany. You could literally film your neighbor bring a Jew into their home and say, my neighbor brought a Jew into their home, and the Nazis could come over, even if the Jew's gone. Well, we have video evidence that you had Wolowitz in your house 2 days ago. So we know that you have been harboring Jews. Bye.
You bring up a really valid point, and that's one of the curses of this technology and the cell phones that we have today. And it's also, there's so much power in technology that we can overcome things that we couldn't have overcome 50 years ago.
Well, yeah. I mean, look at the way we can also. I use the example of using a cell phone to film somebody bringing a Jew into their home in Nazi Germany. We can also turn that on the government now. We can film the government with their crappy interactions and bring that to court, which helps us. Uh,
And
but
yeah,
yeah, I mean, it helps us. But this, the example with Nazi Germany, spells out exactly why government should not have any power or reach over these things. Because if they have this power and reach to abuse this, how horrible can things get on the drop of a dime?
yeah, and I want to add to that too. And this is an idea that just sprung to mind talking about this. And this probably wouldn't be a bad idea. Is for if they're really going to send this many people out going door to door to interact with people and talk to them about getting a vaccine. Maybe if enough people pulled out their cell phone and said, "I'm going to video this interaction between us," and we just compiled those videos into one central place. I think if enough people would videotape the interaction to see the tone, the language used, all that stuff, so that people could compare notes and say, this is what happened where I live, this is what happened where this guy lived or this gal lived, and we can compile that data to see the language being used, because we know for sure that there are key words used all the time to get a certain reaction from people, to
Yep.
either to persuade them or dissuade them from something. But if enough people would just whip out a cell phone and go, "Yeah, I'm going to video this whole interaction, this whole conversation we're going to have,"
A
and
lot of
you
them
get
will
that
run away.
nationwide.
A lot of them will run away. Government
And
hates being filmed.
they do, and I think that would be a phenomenal way of it would be a way to just um, capture the moment, share that information, and put it worldwide, because I'd love to try to see him shut down that amount of people videotaping their conversation or interactions with these health department nuts or whoever they send out to your house.
And on the bright side, the Supreme Court has also made numerous rulings that you have a right to film government officials. So they
Yeah,
can't
and
they can't just arbitrarily shut it down without having another big lawsuit against them like that, because it's a pretty strong and accurate precedent that has been,
freedom of speech.
yeah, it's been set and upheld multiple times. It's one of the things that the Supreme Court's gotten right. Um, and on the note of filming them, as you're bringing up, always, always film your encounters with government, whether it's police, city officials, state officials, federal officials. I don't care who you're talking with. Always film it, because if anything goes awry and the government, whether it's as low of a position as the police or as high as a position as the president, doesn't matter what level of government it is, if something goes awry and they are in fault and it's your word versus them, the courts will 90% of the time take their word over yours.
Right.
Always film your encounters with the government.
And just to add to what we were talking about a minute ago, when I was talking about the language and the tone, if we want to educate people on how persuasive government can be, and things of that nature, I think it would be great. That would be another great teaching tool, is to say, listen to all these people from all over the country. Listen to the words, listen to the phrasing that they're using. This is a nationwide effort. They're reading off they're basically reading off a card, saying things to you, and there's a reason. These people aren't thinking for themselves. They've been taught what to say. There's a reason behind this.
Yep.
This just isn't coincidence that these people are all saying the same thing. This is what government does. This is how they persuade or fear people into acting a certain way. It's by using the key phrases, the language, the tone, everything. There's a reason we're at the point we're at now, and it's because of, again, I fall back to the documentary A Century of the Self, where oh God, Sigmund Freud's nephew, and I can never remember his name, figured out that you can take pictures and words and put them together. And he they used it for commercial purposes, but government and other entities have also learned to tie key phrases and certain images together to persuade public opinion.
Yeah,
And the only
a great example of that is during World War II. I forget the name of the character, but uh, the propaganda poster of that woman basically doing this, who's being a steel worker while all the men are out.
oh yes,
I cannot
yes.
remember the name of that character. Uh, I gotta look this up now. The We Can Do It poster.
Right.
I don't remember the name of the girl that they gave, but yeah, the We Can Do It. The girl's just doing this. Basically, a steel worker, keeping the industries going. And another one, same girl using a drill, saying, "Do the job he left behind."
Rosie the Riveter.
Yes, Rosie the Riveter. Um, yeah, doing the job he left behind, and the We Can Do It one, and join us in a victory job. I mean, there's all these propaganda posters rallying women to the workforce while the men fought in World War II. And by all means, it can be a very good societal and useful tool, even when the government does it. That being a good example of it. But ever since they learned to do that, look at everything else they do with it. They do it to turn everything else around too. You got all these political action groups like the Moms to Ban Guns in Every City, or whatever the hell their organization's
Oh yeah,
called.
yeah.
They got hundreds or thousands of these memes or posters, memes now, of basically the same kind of put a photo in place and throw a word on it and get everyone agitated to be against it. And that's exactly what it is. And they're basically propaganda posters.
Yeah, but again, it's worked well. It's worked really, really well as far as propagandizing nations and against something, and we're seeing it, and we see it every day. It's every day. People are being propagandized about something, and it does work. It does work very well. That you can tie an image to words, you keep repeating them ad nauseum, and people just cave and end up saying, "Okay," it just the propaganda works.
Yeah.
And honestly, a lot of it is that there's not a great understanding how language and images tied together can sway public opinion so greatly and lead us down a path where, it could be 6 months, it could be 6 years down the road. People go, how did we get here? It's because you bought into the imagery. You bought into that language, those key phrases. Terrorism we had, there was a terrorist behind every bush, behind every tree, under every rock. COVID is, it's an invisible enemy. They use that word enemy a lot. And whenever the government brings up something about an enemy, you should automatically just about look at them as not an enemy.
What's another one that they use a lot? War. War on drugs, war on crime, war on poverty, war on homelessness. And what do all these wars bring? What do all these wars bring? They bring more poverty. They bring more drugs. They bring more debt. They bring more homelessness. Boy,
more illiteracy. Yeah.
So what that tells me is we're losing all of these wars. Why are we fighting them? Just surrender. We'll probably fix it faster without the war.
And just to let everybody know, I'll make an announcement here real quick before I go on. So a radio station in Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri, is picking up my Missouri Liberty Report. And so I recorded a couple episodes Tuesday, I believe. And so within about 2 weeks, they'll be on the air live. But my first episode that I introduced myself to my new audience and I said, listen, I am not a Republican. I am not a Democrat. I am a libertarian, lowercase l. I agree with the non-aggression principle. There are going to be things that I talk about, the war on drugs and other things that you may not hear this side of. And if you're a person that gets offended easily or believes in certain things, you might want to change the channel now. I was up front. And the war on drugs is one of those. And that is still something you cannot drill into people's heads.
Yep.
Them to understand that the government, proclaiming a war on drugs, instituting a war on drugs, actually made the problem worse. And all we have to do is look at the Iran-Contra scandal, look at the amount of cocaine brought into this country, the crack cocaine craze explosion that came from that.
Yep.
Because we were fighting communists, that the CIA decided it was okay to ship in 2 to 4 tons of cocaine over that period of time in order to fight communism. And you're going to trust this same government, these same people, to say, yeah, we're going to fight the drug war.
Yep.
Excuse me?
Yep.
It's insane. And again, that the language, the propaganda worked well. There are people who are really conservative on a lot of issues where you could get behind them. But if you say anything about legalizing drugs, they lose their minds. They can't grasp the fact that the drug addiction should not be treated as a criminal problem, but yet a health problem.
I agree.
And the thing is, too, is I think one way we have to get people to buy into this a little bit better, and I've heard this explained multiple times, and I wholeheartedly agree with it. There's a lot of people out there that believe in a second chance for someone. They make a mistake, they should be allowed to get a second chance. But if you go to jail for a drug crime, a victimless crime, that's on your record. When you get out of jail, how many good-paying jobs do you think that person is going to be up for?
Right.
When the employer finds out that they've had a drug conviction,
Right.
You've basically ruined because of a victimless crime. We can't sit here in this country and say that we believe in second chances, but throw people in jail for victimless crimes
And
then ruin the rest of their life.
Here's another aspect to that drives me crazy. There are states that have legalized marijuana that have people still serving time in jail for marijuana charges.
Yes.
How can you legalize that and still keep those people in jail? I don't understand the moral or ethical compass on that one. If you suddenly think this is an okay thing, how can you keep them jailed? Release them. If a law gets passed decriminalizing something, it should come with a stipulation that everyone that has been charged of that will have it erased from their record and anyone serving time released.
I do know that there are a few states. I believe Illinois did that. Certain charges. Again, that's one thing I guess I have to give Illinois, credit for, is that they expunged the records of a lot of people that had been in jail for marijuana. There are several states that don't do that, and yes, the moral and ethical justification isn't there. I don't understand why they do it that way. It makes no sense. I know there was a Missouri legislator who was trying to legalize marijuana for anyone 21 years and up, but it was up to a certain amount. It might have been an ounce. It was legal. You weren't going to get any, jail time over it, not even a fine or a ticket. Yeah, an ounce. I think it was the legal limit was going to be an ounce. And I thought,
wow.
Okay, that's a good start. But how about we just leave all the way across the board and we expunge the records of those who are out of jail on marijuana law or marijuana crimes and then you release all those people and expunge the records of people who are already in jail for possession of marijuana.
You know,
I don't care if it was in I don't care if it was intent to sell or not.
I was
If
just
it's
about to
marijuana,
talk about that actually. One of the charges that I hate the most, and I don't really care if somebody is for or against drugs, whether they're for or against the laws for it. I would hope that they would agree that the intent to sell charge is the most BS charge ever to have been made. Because unless you catch somebody in the process of trying to sell the goods, how can you charge them with that? Just because they have X amount or over X amount does not mean there's an intent to sell. What if they just purchased that? What if they're on their way home? What if they buy in bulk like anyone who goes to Costco and they just don't want to have to go buy more?
Yeah.
How can you charge somebody for intent to sell just because they have what you deem to be an excessive amount? What if they grow their own? And just because they grew their own, they have more than that 4 ounces or whatever, which means intent to sell. How can you charge them with intent to sell? I don't understand that unless you catch somebody in the process of trying to sell. I don't understand how you can charge somebody with that. There's the phrase of innocent until proven guilty. How do you prove that? You cannot prove that unless you catch them in the act.
I think civil asset forfeiture kind of pushed that a little bit, and also it's a way to put them in jail for a longer period of time. It's just like when they were debating the Second Amendment Preservation Act, and their sheriffs that were upset about it because they're like, oh, if we can tie a drug crime to a gun crime, then we can get longer sentencing, blah, 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 on and on.
Yeah.
And I think really all it is it's a way to tack on possibly several years of jail time, because and also mandatory minimum sentencing may have something to do with that, where if you can beef that up and say, oh, they were going to sell it to you, the judge is more likely to say, okay, I'm going to throw you in jail, or lock you up and throw away the key. It was just a way the government went overboard completely and said, okay, if we're going to get these people off the street, we're going to get them off the street for a long time. Now we're going to trump up charges. We're going to make things up as we go along in order to look like we're fighting the good fight against drugs. And essentially, like you said, somebody could have 5 ounces of weed on them, and they're like, oh, you were going to sell that. And you're like, no, that's mine. Oh, not according to the law.
Well,
Okay.
So the law's saying I have to sell if I have more than 5 ounces? Is that what the law says?
Yeah, that maybe you bring up a good point, because it's like, if I was driving down the road and somebody for whatever reason threw 5 ounces of weed out their window, I could drive it to the police station and go, I found this 5 ounces of weed, and according to the state of Missouri, it says that I have to I have an intent to sell, so I'm going to go ahead and sell this, but I want you to know that I found this on the side of the road. But you don't arrest me till I'm done selling it all, because apparently, since I have this much weed in my possession, I have to sell it.
Yeah.
So, by the time we're all done, when I'm all done, then I'll give you a call and you can come pick me up and throw me in jail for selling the devil's lettuce. This whole, again, it's one of these issues where if you have more than 2 brain cells to rub together and you really are a thinking person, none of this should make sense to you. And again, ruining people's lives over a victimless crime. And the other thing that I don't like, and this is another hot button topic on the war on drugs, is now we have this push where if somebody sells someone like heroin and that person ODs and they die, they can find out who sold it to them, they're going to nail them, with like a manslaughter charge. And it's like, wait a minute, unless you can prove this guy held a gun to their head and said, you're gonna buy this heroin, you're gonna inject it in your vein, I don't care what happens to you afterwards. How can you bust somebody for manslaughter that didn't force that person to buy the drugs from them? I don't, and again, it's one of those feel good. We're going to get rid of some of these ODs. How about getting government out of the way
You
and
know,
letting the private sector get in and help with the drug addiction problem instead of you throwing everybody in jail and making worse people out of them? Because I heard a person say on the radio one time, a prison or how did it go? Jail makes a good person bad and a bad person worse.
yeah,
And
because
it's
they're not
true.
rehabilitation like they should be.
No.
Yeah. So one thing that you brought up with regards to that last thing that grinds your gears about the war on drugs, on how they'll try and charge somebody with manslaughter for what somebody else did with their product. That is exactly like what Democrats are pushing for against gun manufacturers right now. Where if you
Yes.
sell a gun to somebody and they use it in a crime, that they're going to charge the manufacturer with the crime. That's not how it works.
According to them, it is.
Yeah, so to all those who are Second Amendment supporters here, and I know that's going to be the vast majority of your audience. It's going to be
Oh,
my
yeah.
entire audience. For those who support the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, do you believe that a gun manufacturer should be held responsible for what somebody does with their product? I'm assuming everyone who's watching this is going to pretty much say no, unless they're a flaming leftist that is totally anti-gun. Then they'll be like, hell yeah.
Let's do this.
Yeah. So if your logic in that situation is that the manufacturer cannot be charged for what the consumer did with their product, how can you apply that to somebody else when, I mean, are we going to charge McDonald's for making everyone fat?
I think they attempted to do that. Why? Well, and maybe not charge them with a crime, but they were going to penalize them
Yeah,
financially.
they probably did try to sue them. We are a kind of sue happy country at this point, wanting to blame everything on someone else. But yeah, I mean, it's also along the lines of absurdity of, if you trespass on a somebody's property and a dog bites you, you can sue the person because the dog bit you, unless there was ample warning of beware of guard dog. You trespass on somebody's property, you're committing a crime, and you're going to sue somebody because their dog defended the property. That's absurd. And the fact that courts have actually allowed that is even more absurd.
Before, because we're getting close to the 2 hour mark, but I'm trying to look up and see if there's a video. Ron Paul was on one of these talk shows years ago, and it's where everybody's ganged up on. There's him and another couple people from the Libertarian Party, and the topic was the war on drugs, and Ron Paul saying a monolithic government can't, you shouldn't penalize people for what they decide to put in their body, and so on and so forth. And of course, all these people are standing up and yelling at him and saying he was a nut job and so on and so forth. And this one kid stands up. He's like, put the soldiers at the border, keep the drugs from coming in. And he's like, there's no monolithic approach to this. He's like, you're a little overweight. Maybe the government should come in and put you on a diet. And this dude loses his mind. He just I'm a little overweight. And you could see he snapped in an instant. He was so mad. But Ron Paul in that video, you can tell he's agitated. People are coming at him and just yelling at him, and you can tell he's getting irritated. It's kind of enjoyable to watch, to see Ron Paul dude, I'm gonna take you to
I've
school
never seen that man mad.
right about now.
I've never seen that man mad. He's always the most calm, collected person I've ever seen. So if he gets upset in that video, oh man.
Yeah, like I said, I wish I could remember the name of the show. It was something from the 80s, like the early to mid 80s, and the talk show host was attacking him too. I mean, it was one of those stupid shows that used to be on that people just watch to see other people just argue with each other. It's this stupid nonsense.
Almost like one of those Glenn Morgan shows, or Piers Morgan, I mean.
Yeah, or like Jerry Springer, that type of deal,
Yeah,
where you're just
yeah.
like, oh God, this freaking complete uh, dumpster fires on TV again. Great, I need to change the channel. But so, like I said, we're winding up to the 2 hour mark. So Jesse, why don't you go ahead and give us the answer? Well, give us the question again to the Constitution quiz,
Okay.
and then give us the answer.
All right. So at the beginning of the stream today, the podcast, I asked the question, what glaring spelling error was made right above where our founding fathers signed the Constitution? And the answer to that is Pennsylvania was spelt incorrectly.
Oh wow.
Pennsylvania was spelt with one N, P-E-N-Y, and go on from there. So instead of P-E-N-N, it was just P-E-N, Sylvania. And a fun fact about that, however, is that this was actually a common and accepted spelling of the state at the time. And it was also spelled with only one N on the Liberty Bell. Ironically, the state of Pennsylvania is spelt with two N's in every other instance of the Constitution. So, where they signed the Constitution, Pennsylvania was spelt with one N, P-E-N, Sylvania. And everywhere else in the Constitution, it was P-E-N-N, Sylvania.
Interesting.
Yeah, and yeah, the fun fact that the Liberty Bell also has it spelt with only one N.
Well, there you have it, folks. Interesting as always. And Jesse, thank you again so much for joining me late notice. I really, really, really appreciate it because I'll be honest, I was sitting down. I got the message from Ross saying he couldn't make it. And I'm like, oh, I got to go home and try to dig up articles and try to find some topics to cover. And I thought, oh, wait, maybe I'll get lucky and Jesse will be available. He's my podcast savior at times. So and fortunately enough for me, you were available and able and willing to join me on this. So again, I greatly appreciate it. And folks, that's going to do it for this edition. Oh, by the way, Jesse, if you want to hang on for a minute, we'll talk after this is
yeah,
all
and
over with.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
For the viewers, please check out the Constitutional Grassroots Movement on YouTube and subscribe to my channel. As of right now, I only have content with John from the Push for Liberty here. But I do intend to start interviewing candidates and doing some of my own original content as well. And if you hate yourself, buy this crappy Mountain Dew. Buy this disgusting pineapple coconut Mountain Dew if you hate your life. You will absolutely despise yourself afterwards, and you'll never think of yourself the same.
I don't think you're going to be getting hired on by Mountain Dew for advertising anytime soon, Jeff.
Oh, no, not after that drink.
Well, all right, folks, that's going to do it. And again, as always, I urge you to check out MOLibertyRadio.us, especially on Sunday nights from 6 to 9 p.m. Central Standard Time for Off the Cuff Radio with Sam and Trish Britton. Also, check out Constitutional Grassroots Movement on YouTube. Like Jesse said, check those out. I mean, again, you hear him. He knows his stuff. He knows his history, especially on the Constitution. And as he adds and Jesse, just to let you know, as you add content, let me know, and then I will mention it on my podcast as well to try to get you some traffic over there. So if you let me know when you have videos or interviews out, let me know, and I will. I'll even post a link over to the YouTube videos so people can view them. But keep an eye out for this stuff, folks. And again, thanks so much for joining me. We'll talk to you. I don't know when I'm going to have Roz on. Unfortunately, my overtime is getting ready to ramp up during the week. So, and Roz's best time for an interview apparently is in the middle of the week. So it may get pushed back a couple of weeks. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Maybe things will alleviate themselves at work here soon, but I'm not going to cross my fingers and hold my breath for that. But anyway, we'll take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.